Ethan Ward had lived on the mountain for so long that the wilderness felt more familiar to him than any town or road. People in the valley called him a mountain man because he preferred the quiet life. He liked the slow mornings, the smell of pine trees, and the open sky that stretched endlessly above him. Ethan had built a small wooden cabin by himself, close to a frozen lake and surrounded by tall pines. Winters were harsh, but he knew how to survive them. He knew how the air changed before a storm, how the wind carried warnings, and how the snow could erase a trail in minutes. On one late winter afternoon, Ethan stepped out of his cabin to check the sky before leaving for the valley. He needed a few supplies, and he planned to return before sundown. The air was calm, but he felt something off. The clouds were gathering fast, the edges turning thick and heavy. He knew a storm was coming sooner than expected. Ethan tightened his coat, strapped a small supply pack on his back, and started down the narrow trail that cut through the woods. Snow crunched beneath his boots in a steady rhythm. The mountain was cold, but Ethan's body had learned to handle it over the years. As he walked, he noticed the wind getting sharper, pushing against him with small bursts. It was the kind of wind that warned travelers to turn back. He considered returning home, but he thought he had enough time to finish his errand. Still, he moved faster, knowing mountain storms could change in a moment. The trees around him swayed but remained mostly quiet. The deeper he went into the woods, the more the sky darkened. The snowflakes started falling slow at first, then faster, gathering on his coat and beard. After half an hour, the snowfall thickened and visibility dropped. The trail ahead was becoming harder to see. Ethan stopped, took a deep breath, and turned around. He had been through storms before, and he knew this one was serious. As he retraced his steps, he kept close to the trees to stay protected from the wind. The snow was blowing sideways now, scratching the air around him. A few minutes later, Ethan noticed something strange. Through the blowing snow, he thought he saw a small movement near a fallen tree. He slowed down and narrowed his eyes, trying to focus. The storm made everything blurry, but that small shape didn't seem like part of the forest. He took a few careful steps forward, then stopped again. It looked like a mound of snow, but something about its shape felt wrong. It wasn't smooth like the snowdrifts. It was uneven, almost like a person curled up. Ethan felt a sudden worry rise in his chest. People rarely came through this part of the mountain. Anyone caught in the storm could be in serious trouble. He walked closer, brushing snow aside with his gloved hands. His heart dropped when he saw a pale face beneath the snow, a young woman lying on the ground, barely moving. Her hair was frozen, her cheeks were red from the cold, and her eyes were closed. She wore a winter coat, but it was thin, not enough for the mountain weather. Ethan touched her wrist gently. Her skin was icy, but he felt a faint pulse. She was alive, but extremely weak. Without wasting a second, Ethan pulled off his heavy coat and wrapped it around her. He didn't know who she was or how she ended up here, but he knew one thing: leaving her in the storm meant she wouldn't survive. He lifted her into his arms carefully. She was light, almost weightless, as if the cold had drained all strength from her body. The wind hit him harder as he started moving again. Snow clung to his eyelashes, and he had to keep his head low to see the trail. Every few steps he checked the woman's face. She didn't wake up, but her breathing continued, soft and unsteady. The storm grew stronger, as if the mountain itself was trying to stop him. Even Ethan, used to this weather, felt the struggle. His cabin wasn't far, but the storm made the distance feel longer. The snow was already covering their tracks behind them. The wind howled through the trees, carrying loose branches with it. Still, Ethan kept going, driven by determination. He didn't know this woman, but he couldn't ignore someone in danger. After what felt like an hour, Ethan finally saw the outline of his cabin through the haze of snow. Relief washed through him, but the storm pushed him harder, almost like it wanted to test him. He leaned into the wind and made the final steps to his porch. Inside the cabin, warmth greeted him like a welcome friend. He kicked the door shut behind him and laid the woman gently on his bed. Ethan hurried to the fireplace, adding more logs until the flames grew strong and bright. The room slowly warmed. He returned to the woman and checked her breathing again. It was still there, but weak. He removed the icy snow from her hair and carefully loosened her cold, stiff coat. He made sure she stayed covered with blankets while he warmed water on the stove. He didn't want to shock her system, so he kept the room at a steady temperature. When the water was warm enough, he dipped a cloth and gently touched it to her hands and face to help bring life back to her skin. Seconds later, the woman let out a small breath, so faint that Ethan almost missed it. Her eyelids fluttered, and slowly she opened her eyes. For a moment, she looked confused, almost scared. Ethan stepped back slightly to give her space. "You're safe," he said softly. "You're inside my cabin. I found you outside in the snow," she blinked, as if trying to remember something. Her lips parted, but her voice was barely audible. With effort, she whispered her name, Mara. That was all she managed before her eyes closed again, and she faded back into unconsciousness. Ethan didn't panic. He knew people who survived severe cold often drifted in and out of awareness. He placed another blanket over her and gently lifted her head to help her drink a little warm broth. She took a small sip before resting again. Night arrived quickly, and the storm outside grew louder. Snow tapped against the windows like soft drumming. The cabin shook lightly each time a strong gust hit. Ethan checked the woman Moreau several times. She was breathing more steadily now, though still weak. As the hours passed, Ethan sat near the fire and watched her. He wondered who she was, why she was alone on the mountain, and what had happened to her. It wasn't normal for someone to be so far out in the wilderness, especially without proper clothing. But he knew better than to question her right now. She needed rest, warmth, and time to recover. At one point during the night, Mara stirred again. Ethan walked over quietly. She didn't fully wake up, but she whispered something so faint he almost didn't catch it. It sounded like a single word, help. It wasn't clear if she was speaking to him or reliving a memory, but Ethan felt a heaviness in his chest. Whoever she was, she must have gone through something difficult before he found her. He stayed awake most of the night, adding more wood to the fire and listening to the storm. His cabin was strong, but the wind still found small places to whistle through. He made sure the room stayed warm and the blanket stayed around her. He didn't want the cold to return. By early morning, the storm finally began to calm. The cabin was quiet again, except for the crackling of the fire. Ethan stepped outside briefly to check the surroundings. The world was covered in fresh snow, smooth and untouched. The sky was gray, but peaceful. When he returned inside, Mara was still asleep, but her breathing sounded stronger. Ethan knew she would eventually wake up and tell him what happened. But for now, he felt relieved knowing he had reached her in time. He looked at her one more moment and realized something unexpected. Saving her didn't just help hurt, had awakened something inside him too. For years he had lived alone, distant from the world. But now, with a stranger fighting for life in his cabin, he felt a quiet sense of purpose again. Everything had changed the moment he found her in the snow. Morning slowly settled over the mountains, bringing a pale light through the cabin window. The storm from the previous night had passed, leaving the world outside covered in deep white snow. Ethan Ward stood near the window for a moment, watching the calm after the chaos. The trees bowed under the new weight, and the air looked still and clean. But his thoughts kept returning to the woman lying on his bed, Mara, the stranger he had rescued from the snow. He walked over to her quietly. She was still asleep, but her breathing sounded stronger than before. Her skin had regained some color, and her hands were no longer ice cold. Ethan gently adjusted the blankets around her shoulders, careful not to disturb her rest. She needed strength more than anything. He heated water again and prepared another small bowl of warm broth. He placed it near the fire to keep warm, and then stepped outside briefly to check the area around his cabin. The storm had erased every track, including his own from the day before. It was normal after heavy snowfall, but something in Ethan's mind felt unsettled. He didn't know who Mara was running from or what had brought her into the mountains during such dangerous weather. Whatever it was, it didn't seem simple. Ethan returned inside, removed his boots, and placed more logs on the fire. The warmth grew stronger, filling the cabin with a soft golden glow. After a while, he heard a small sound, a faint sigh. Mara's eyes opened slowly, blinking at the light. She tried to sit up but winced from weakness. Ethan moved closer but kept his voice gentle. Easy. Don't push yourself yet. At him with confusion at first, as if she wasn't sure where she was. But then she saw the blankets, the fire, the wooden walls of the cabin. A hint of fear returned to her eyes. You're safe here, Ethan said softly. I found you outside in the snow yesterday. You were barely conscious. I brought you inside so you could recover. Mara's lips parted, and she tried to speak, but her voice cracked. Ethan handed her a cup of warm water. She drank slowly, and after a few sips, she took a small breath. Thank you, she whispered. You don't have to talk yet, Ethan replied. Just rest. You can tell me everything when you're stronger. But Mara shook her head weakly. No, you saved my life. You deserve to know why I was out there. Ethan hesitated. He didn't want to stress her, but she looked determined, even in her weak state. He sat on a small stool near the bed, giving her space to gather her thoughts. Mara closed her eyes for a moment, and then began speaking with slow, careful breaths. She said she came from a nearby town across the valley. She wasn't a traveler or a hiker. She wasn't out there by mistake. She was running. Ethan listened quietly, his expression calm but serious. She told him she worked for a small community office where people sometimes reported local issues, missing items, unusual activities, disputes. It was simple work, but recently she had stumbled upon something larger. She didn't go into heavy detail, but she explained that she had discovered something that certain people did not want exposed. She tried to report it, but before she could reach the proper authorities, someone started following her. Her voice trembled slightly as she continued. She said she had no family nearby, no one to turn to. So she decided to flee into the mountains, hoping the wilderness would keep her hidden until she could reach someone trustworthy. But the storm arrived too quickly. She got lost. She ran out of strength. She thought the cold would take her life. She paused to breathe, and Ethan waited patiently. He didn't rush her. After a moment, she continued. I had no idea where I was, she said softly. I just kept walking, trying to stay awake. I thought I wouldn't survive. Her voice grew faint. Ethan handed her the warm broth he had prepared. She held the cup with shaking hands, and he helped steady it gently. She drank slowly, and the warmth helped her regain a little more strength. Ethan finally asked the question he had been wondering. You still in danger? Mara looked away for a moment, her eyes lowering as though she didn't want to worry him. But Ethan could tell she was thinking carefully. When she looked back at him, she gave a small nod. I don't know if they followed me into the mountains, she whispered. But if they are still searching, they won't stop easily. Ethan felt a heaviness settle in his chest. He wasn't afraid for himself. He had survived many challenges in these mountains, but he felt protective toward Mara. She wasn't strong enough to move yet. She needed time, warmth, and safety. You can stay here as long as you need, he said calmly. No one knows this cabin exists unless they find the trail, and after the storm, the paths are covered. Mara's eyes softened with gratitude, but Ethan sensed she still felt uneasy. He reassured her again. You're not alone now. You're safe for the moment. Mara nodded slowly and rested again, drifting between brief moments of wakefulness and long periods of sleep. Ethan checked on her often, giving her water and keeping the fire burning strong. The cabin was small, but it had everything they needed: warmth, shelter, and quiet. Later in the afternoon, she woke again, this time a little stronger. She tried to sit up, and Ethan helped her lean against the wooden headboard. She looked around the cabin with clearer eyes now. The place was simple but warm, a few shelves filled with supplies, a table with tools, a stack of wood near the fireplace. It's peaceful here, she said softly. Ethan smiled faintly. That's why I live up here. She watched him for a moment, studying his calm expression and steady movements. There was something reassuring about him. Didn't ask too many questions, didn't pressure her. He simply offered help without expecting anything in return. Mara slowly lifted her hand and reached into her coat pocket. Ethan noticed the movement and leaned closer, thinking she might be uncomfortable. But then he saw her pull out a small object, a thin flash drive with a piece of cloth tied around it. She held it tightly, as if it was the most important thing she owned. "This is what they wanted," she whispered. "This is why I ran." Ethan studied the small device, didn't know exactly what information it held, but he could see the seriousness in her eyes. It wasn't something ordinary. It wasn't something she would risk her life for, unless it meant something important. "Do they know you have it?" he asked calmly. "I think so," she replied. "That's why they tried to find me." Ethan nodded slowly. He understood now why she had been so scared, why she kept looking around as if expecting danger. She wasn't just lost, she was escaping something real. "You don't need to worry right now," he said gently. "The storm made it impossible for anyone to track you. They won't find this cabin easily." Mara's eyes softened with relief, but there was still a shadow of fear. Ethan decided not to ask more questions for the moment. She needed rest, not interrogation. The rest of the day passed quietly. Mara rested while Ethan worked around the cabin, repairing a loose window shutter, checking the wood supply, and preparing a simple stew. Every time he looked at her, he made sure she was warm and comfortable. She watched him sometimes, noticing how calmly he moved and how quietly he handled everything. It was strange to her how safe she felt in a stranger's home. As night approached, Mara began to feel uneasy again. Ethan noticed her glancing at the window several times. When he finally asked if something was bothering her, she hesitated before answering. "I keep thinking they might come," she whispered. Ethan approached the window and looked outside. There was nothing but darkness and snow-covered trees. The forest was still, no tracks, no strange sound, just silence. "They won't reach this deep into the mountains," he said softly. "Not in this weather." Mara nodded, but she still looked uneasy. Ethan moved a chair closer to the bed and sat where she could see him. "I'll keep watch," he said. "You can sleep." She relaxed slightly at his words. Something about his steady confidence made her trust him fully. After a few minutes, her breathing slowed. She drifted into sleep again. Ethan stayed awake long after the fire dimmed. He listened to the quiet. His thoughts kept returning to Mara's fear, her escape, and the small flash drive she held like a lifeline. He didn't know what danger would come, but he knew one thing with certainty: she wasn't facing it alone anymore. He would help her. He didn't know why he felt so sure of it, but inside his heart the decision was already made. The mountain. Man who once wanted nothing but silence had stepped into someone else's storm, and her secret was about to change everything more than either of them yet understood. The next morning arrived slowly, with a cold, quiet light settling over the mountains. The storm had passed completely, leaving thick snow resting on the branches like soft pillows. The world outside seemed peaceful again, almost untouched. But inside Ethan's cabin, tension quietly sat beneath the calm surface. Ethan woke early, as he always did. Even before opening his eyes, he could sense the temperature of the room, the strength of the fire, and the faint breathing of the person sleeping a few feet away. Mara was resting, curled under the blankets, her face calmer than the night before. Her strength was slowly returning, but her fear still lingered. Ethan rose and added more wood to the fire, letting the flames grow bright. The warm glow spread through the cabin, bringing comfort. He prepared hot water and boiled oats for breakfast, keeping the sounds gentle so he wouldn't disturb her. But before long, Mara's eyes opened slowly. She blinked at the soft light and then at Ethan, who was standing near the stove. For a moment, she looked peaceful. But as memories returned, she tensed again. Ethan noticed immediately. "You slept better?" he said kindly. "That's good." Mara nodded weakly and tried to sit up. Ethan came closer and helped her lean against the wall. She thanked him quietly. "You're safe," he told her again. "No one has come." There were no tracks outside. Mara took a slow breath. "I know you're trying to reassure me," she said softly. "I appreciate it. But I also know the people searching for me won't give up easily." Ethan didn't argue. He knew she wasn't exaggerating. He had seen the fear in her eyes, the seriousness in her voice the night before. Whatever information she carried must have threatened someone powerful enough to chase her into the wilderness. Mara pulled the flash drive from her pocket again and held it between her fingers. It looked small in her hand, almost insignificant, but Ethan understood it meant a great deal. "I can't hide forever," she whispered. "Sooner or later, I have to get this into the right hands." Ethan studied her for a moment, then nodded. "You're right, and you won't be doing it alone." She looked at him with surprise, almost disbelief. "You've already done so much. You don't need to put yourself in danger." "I've lived on this mountain for many years," Ethan replied calmly. "I know its trails better than anyone. If someone is looking for you, this cabin is no longer safe enough. We need to get you to someone who can help." Mara lowered her gaze, touched by his willingness to help a stranger. "Why?" she finally asked. "Why are you doing this?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He looked at the fire, thinking the truth was something he hadn't admitted even to himself. He had lived alone for so long that he had almost forgotten what it felt like to help someone not just with a task, but with their life. "You needed help," he said simply, "and I found you. That's enough." Mara's eyes softened. She didn't push further. She understood the meaning in his quiet words. They ate a small breakfast, and Mara regained a little more strength. Afterward, Ethan began preparing for their journey. He packed food, water, blankets, and a small first aid kit. He checked his old snow sled, making sure the runners were strong enough for the terrain. Mara watched him silently, knowing each movement he made carried purpose. When Ethan finally returned to her side, he spoke gently. "We'll move slowly. I'll pull the sled, and you'll stay wrapped in blankets. I'll take the safest back trails." Mara nodded, though fear flickered in her eyes. She wasn't afraid of Ethan. She trusted him completely. But the idea of going back toward the world, toward the danger she had escaped, made her heart race. Ethan handed her a thick coat he had taken from storage. "This will keep you warm," he said. She slipped it on, grateful for the extra layer. "Thank you," she whispered again. When they stepped outside, the cold air bit at their cheeks, but the sky was calm. The snow glistened beneath the morning sun. Ethan helped Mara settle into the sled, wrapping her securely. Then he took the rope, tested his footing, and began pulling. The trail was quiet, almost eerily peaceful. Only the sound of the sled gliding over the snow broke the silence. Ethan walked with steady steps, carefully navigating through the trees. Mara watched him from behind, admiring his strength and calm presence. He looked like someone who belonged to the mountain, someone who understood every sound and shadow. For the first hour, everything went smoothly. They moved through narrow paths lined with snow-covered branches. Mara could see the soft smoke rising from the chimney of Ethan's cabin, growing smaller behind them. For a moment, she felt a strange sadness leaving it. Even though she had been there only briefly, it had felt safe, like a small island of peace in a world that was chasing her. But as they traveled deeper down the mountain, Ethan suddenly slowed. Mara felt the sled come to a stop. She lifted her head and saw him staring at the snow-covered ground ahead. "What happened?" she asked quietly. Ethan didn't answer immediately. He crouched down and touched the snow. Then he stood and looked around, his expression tightening. "There are tracks," he finally said. "Fresh ones." Mara's heart dropped. "Are they?" "I don't know," Ethan replied calmly, "but we need to be careful." He scanned the area, his eyes sharp. Years of living alone in the wilderness had sharpened his instincts. He could feel when something was wrong, even if he didn't see it directly. Mara gripped the sides of the sled. "What do we do?" Ethan exhaled slowly. "We stay quiet, and we take a different route." He turned sharply away from the tracks and guided the sled toward a narrow side trail. This path was rougher and less familiar, but it led deeper into the woods where visibility was low. The trees grew thicker here, giving them better cover. They moved carefully. Ethan listened to every sound, the crunch of snow under his boots, the distant creak of tree branches, even the faint whistle of wind. Mara stayed silent, trusting him completely. After a long time navigating the dense forest, Ethan stopped again. He raised a hand, signaling Mara not to speak. She felt her heartbeat quickened. In the distance, Faint voices carried across the cold air. 2 men. Maybe more. Mara's chest tightened. Ethan crouched low, pulling the sled behind a cluster of thick pine trees. The branches hid them well. He turned to her, placing a finger gently across his lips. She nodded, understanding the message. They stayed completely still. The voices grew slightly louder, though still far away. The men sounded frustrated, as if they couldn't find what they were searching for. Ethan listened closely, his jaw tightening. He didn't recognize them, but he knew they weren't hikers or locals. Their tone carried a sense of urgency, maybe even anger. Minutes passed slowly. Mara held her breath, her fingers digging into the blankets. Ethan remained calm, but his eyes stayed sharp, tracking the sound. Finally, the voices faded, their footsteps growing distant. Ethan waited longer, making sure the danger had passed. Only when the forest returned to complete silence did he speak again. "They're searching for something," he said quietly. "Or someone." Mara felt her stomach twist. "It's them," she whispered. "I know it." Ethan didn't deny it. "Then we need to move faster." He pulled the sled through the woods with renewed determination. He didn't rush blindly, but his steps were more focused. He avoided open areas, stuck to the thick trees, and changed directions several times to shake off any chance of being followed. Hours passed. The sun moved slowly across the sky. Mara grew tired, but she didn't complain. She watched Ethan pull her through the mountain, his strength unwavering. She felt a deep gratitude, stronger than any words she could speak. Eventually, the forest thinned, and the land sloped downward. In the distance, Mara noticed a small wooden structure almost hidden between tall trees. It was an old ranger station, unused for years except by one person Ethan knew well. "We're close," he said. "A friend of mine stays here sometimes. He can help." When they reached the station, Ethan knocked twice in a familiar rhythm. A moment later, the door opened, revealing a man with graying hair and a strong build. His eyes widened with surprise when he saw Ethan. "Ethan? What's going on?" "We need help, Tom," Ethan said simply. "It's serious." Tom stepped back immediately, letting them inside. The room was warm, with a small radio on the table and a map pinned to the wall. Ethan helped Mara inside and explained briefly what had happened, how he found her, what she carried, and who might be after her. Tom listened closely, his expression turning serious. When Ethan finished, Tom nodded. "You did the right thing bringing her here. I can contact the right authorities, people who can protect her and take whatever evidence she has." Mara held out the flash drive with trembling hands. Tom accepted it carefully, understanding its importance. Within minutes, he used the radio to send a coded message. Help was on the way. When Tom turned back to Mara and Ethan, he gave a reassuring smile. "You're safe now. They won't reach you here." Mara felt tears fill her eyes, not from fear, but from relief. She looked at Ethan, who stood quietly beside her. In his steady face, she saw the strength that had carried her through the storm, through fear, through danger. Hours later, officials arrived on snow vehicles. They took her statement, secured the evidence, and escorted her to safety. But before she left, she turned to Ethan. "You saved my life," she said softly. "I will never forget what you did for me." Ethan nodded quietly. "Take care of yourself." Mara hesitated, then added, "I hope we will meet again." Ethan didn't make promises, but he felt something warm in Z.